As Rebecca sat across from me, her face pale and her hands shaking, I slid the folder of evidence onto the table. Her eyes widened as she flipped through each page: photos, text messages, financial records, proof of everything I had uncovered. What is this?" she stammered, her voice barely holding together. Leaning forward, I kept my tone steady, controlled, but cold. "This," I said, meeting her gaze, "is your reality, Rebecca. And it's time you faced the consequences." Her lips parted slightly, confusion flashing in her eyes. "Now?" she whispered, as if she was still trying to process what was happening. The weight of what she had done was written all over her face, but what she didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I had already secured everything. The house. Custody of the kids. My freedom. The soft glow of my computer screen cast long shadows across the walls of my home office. This was my space, my world, a world of wires, monitors, and relentless focus. I sat hunched over my desk, fingers moving fluidly across the keyboard, each keystroke breaking the quiet of the night. Outside, the world slept beneath a blanket of stars, but I barely noticed. Time had lost its meaning. The clock read 9:37 p.m., but I didn't care. My mind was locked in, buried deep in the pursuit of precision. Every line of code, every fix, every breakthrough was another step toward securing the life I was trying to build for my family. Rebecca, on the other hand, thrived in a different world. She ran a successful fitness business, one that demanded just as much drive and discipline, but in a completely different way. She attacked challenges head-on, fueled by energy and enthusiasm, finding joy in social connections and self-improvement. Her desk. Spotless. Her schedule. Planned to the minute. Every detail of her life was meticulously managed, a reflection of her need for control. Meanwhile, my workspace told a different story: scattered notebooks, empty coffee cups, a mess that revealed the late nights and sacrifices I had made. The quiet was broken by a soft knock at the door. "Daniel? Can we talk?" Her voice was calm, but there was something about it, something measured. Something that made my stomach tighten. I looked up as the door creaked open, and there she was, standing in the dim light of the hallway. She stepped inside, her figure outlined by the glow from behind, and for a moment, I just watched her. There was a strange stillness about her, an unsettling kind of quiet. She eased onto the leather sofa, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. "What's up?" I asked, swiveling my chair to face her. I kept my tone light, but my eyes narrowed slightly, trying to read whatever it was she wasn't saying. She took a deep breath, staring at the floor. "I've been thinking about our marriage," she finally said. I felt my body tense. My gut already knew where this was headed, but I forced myself to stay still. "All right," I said carefully. "And?" She lifted her head then, her eyes meeting mine. "I need freedom," she said, her voice steady, almost rehearsed. I blinked. "Freedom? I feel trapped." Her fingers tightened around each other, her nails pressing into her skin. "I need to grow, to explore. I think we need space." She hesitated, then added, "I want to experience life with other people." Her words hit like a gut punch. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My fists clenched against my thighs as I fought to keep my expression neutral. "You're saying you want to sleep with other men," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She flinched, but didn't back down. "It's not just about that," she insisted. "It's about finding myself again. Our marriage, it feels stagnant." I shot to my feet, the chair scraping against the floor as I started pacing. "Stagnant?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Because I've been working late? Because I've been busting my ass to build a future for us? That's what you call stagnant?" She didn't say anything. She just sat there, watching me, as if she had expected this reaction. I waited for her to take it back, to say she didn't mean it. But when she finally spoke again, it wasn't hesitation I heard, it was something else. Something eerie. And that's when I knew. She had already made up her mind. That's not what I meant, she shot back, her voice laced with defensiveness. I just feel like we've lost something. The spark, the connection. I stopped mid-step, turning to face her, my pulse hammering in my ears. My eyes locked onto hers, burning with disbelief. And your solution, I asked, my voice sharp, is to sleep with other men? To break the vows we made to each other? Rebecca jolted to her feet, her carefully composed exterior finally starting to crack. You don't understand, she insisted, her voice rising. This isn't just about that. It's about me, my journey, my growth. I scoffed, anger boiling just beneath the surface. And what about me? I demanded. What about our kids? What about the life we built together? Or does none of that matter to you anymore? Her eyes welled up with tears, but I didn't let myself feel sorry for her. You've been so distant, Daniel, she said, her voice breaking. When was the last time we really connected? A bitter laugh escaped me, shaking my head as the absurdity of it all sank in. So that's it? That's what you're telling yourself? That this is my fault? I let out another humorless chuckle, one that held no real amusement. My hard work, my effort to give us a better life, that's why you're doing this? That's why you want to tear our marriage apart? The room went still. The air between us was thick, heavy with the weight of words we hadn't spoken yet. For a long moment, we just stood there, locked in a battle of silence, breathing unevenly, neither of us willing to be the first to look away. When I finally spoke, my voice was flat, void of any warmth. Get out of my office. Rebecca hesitated, searching my face as if there was still a chance to turn things around. But there wasn't. Not anymore. Without another word, she turned and walked away, the soft click of the door behind her echoing through the room. I sank into my chair, pressing my hands to my face, feeling the crushing weight of everything she had just said. How had it come to this? The days that followed were filled with an uneasy quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Rebecca's behavior became increasingly erratic. She was at the gym for hours at a time, always conveniently too busy to talk. Her phone never left her hand, conversations kept hushed, her messages quickly swiped away when I was near. At first, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Maybe this was just her way of dealing with the fight. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Then, one night, while she was in the shower, her phone lit up on the kitchen counter. A single text flashed across the screen. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. Jake's smiling face with smiling eyes. My stomach twisted into knots. With a shaking hand, I picked up the phone, my pulse thundering in my ears. My fingers moved on their own, scrolling through the notifications, scanning the messages, plans for coffee dates, flirty exchanges, compliments about how beautiful she looked, and suggestive emojis that left nothing to the imagination. Every doubt I had was gone. My worst fears were staring me right in the face. I needed to know everything. That night, while she slept soundly beside me, I pulled out my laptop and logged into her email, a password we once shared back when trust wasn't an issue. What I found made my stomach churn. Flirty emails. Secret conversations. Exchanges with not just one, but multiple men. Some of them went back months. I love the way you make me feel. Let's keep this between us. The words burned themselves into my memory, a cruel reminder of just how far gone she really was. And once I saw the pattern, I started noticing everything. The gym sessions that didn't match her usual schedule. The new dress tucked away in the back of her closet, one I had never seen before. I started gathering evidence, documenting every detail. Screenshots, emails, photos, every interaction, every lie, every betrayal. I wasn't just piecing together a timeline. I was preparing for the moment she would have to face the truth. Late that night, I sat alone in the dark, the steady hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. My mind drifted back to a different time, a time when Rebecca's laughter filled our home, when her smile could light up the entire kitchen on a lazy Sunday morning. I could still see her, standing at the stove, hair pulled up in a messy bun, flipping pancakes for Lily and Noah, humming to herself like she didn't have a single care in the world. She had been my partner. My best friend. My anchor. Now, all that was left was silence. Cold, distant silence. The warm woman I had built a life with had disappeared, leaving behind someone I barely recognized. Her laughter had been replaced with empty nods and distracted responses. The love that once lived in her eyes was long gone, replaced by indifference. And that, somehow, was worse than all the lies. Mornings had become nothing more than rushed goodbyes. No shared moments over coffee, no lingering conversations, just Rebecca darting out the door, phone clutched in her hand, mumbling half-hearted excuses about work or a client meeting. Even the way she looked at me had changed. Those eyes that once held warmth and admiration now carried a cold detachment, a distance I could feel but couldn't seem to cross. My heart ached, not just for myself, but for our children. Lily's endless curiosity and Noah's boundless energy had always been the glue holding our family together, keeping us grounded through life's ups and downs. But now, that glue was starting to crack, and I feared the moment when everything would shatter beyond repair. Beneath the heartbreak, anger smoldered like a slow-burning fire. How could she throw everything away, our life, our family, our years together, for something so reckless, so fleeting? And yet, no matter how much resentment brewed inside me, part of me still longed for the woman I had once loved. The Rebecca who used to look at me like I was enough. As the first light of dawn spilled through the curtains, I made a silent vow. No matter how much this hurt, I wouldn't let it touch Lily and Noah. They deserved stability, a sense of normalcy, even if their world was quietly falling apart. That thought gave me strength. Strength I would need for what was coming. Later that morning, I sat at my desk, the blue glow of my monitor reflecting off my hardened expression. My fingers moved with purpose, shifting money from our joint accounts into a separate, secure one in my name. The transactions were small, subtle, just enough to stay under the radar. One by one, I pulled up our financial records, downloading years of statements, tracking every asset, every liability. Each click of the mouse felt like another piece of armor, another layer of preparation for the battle ahead. This had to be done carefully. Rebecca couldn't suspect a thing. But the more reckless she became, the more determined I was. She had stopped hiding it. The late nights. The missing hours. The flimsy excuses. She wasn't even trying anymore. Then, one evening, as she walked into the kitchen after yet another unexplained outing, something inside me snapped. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice sharp, cutting straight through the silence. She paused mid-step, clearly taken aback by the tone. But she recovered quickly, slipping into casual indifference. "The gym," she said, reaching for a glass. "At 10 o'clock at night?" I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "What are you training for, the Olympics?" Her hand froze for a fraction of a second, but then she forced a shrug. "I had a late client session," she said smoothly, pouring water into her glass. "I didn't let it go." "At 10 o'clock?" I repeated, my voice edged with disbelief. She exhaled sharply, turning to glare at me. "Why are you interrogating me?" I stepped closer, my voice lowering. "Because," I said, each word deliberate, "I don't believe you." Rebecca's frustration flared. "You don't trust me anymore." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Trust?" I scoffed, shaking my head. "That's rich, coming from you." Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? I let the silence hang between us for a moment before replying. It means, I said, my voice cool and steady, I see exactly what's going on. I'm not blind, Rebecca. Her expression hardened, but she didn't say a word. And that silence? It was more damning than any excuse she could have given. I took another step forward, closing the space between us. You want your freedom? Fine, I said, my tone cutting. But don't mistake my silence for stupidity. The air between us crackled with unspoken words, tension thick enough to suffocate. Then, without another word, Rebecca turned on her heel and walked away, disappearing down the hallway. I watched her go, my chest tight with a mix of anger and grim certainty. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I finally did what I had been avoiding for weeks. I accessed her computer, a space I had always respected, a boundary I had never crossed before. What I found made my stomach turn. Emails. Social media messages. Conversations that left no doubt. Flirtations. Plans to meet. Explicit exchanges. I saved everything. Screenshots, files, timestamps, every single detail. This wasn't just about knowing the truth anymore. This was about preparing for the moment she would have no choice but to face it. The next morning, over breakfast, Rebecca tried to act as if everything was normal. But I wasn't playing along. Busy day ahead? I asked, keeping my tone light, casual, too casual. She hesitated, sensing something beneath the question. Just the usual, she replied, keeping her eyes on her plate. Why? I shrugged. No reason, I said, my gaze steady, never leaving hers. I just like knowing where my wife is. Her fork slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the plate. A flash of irritation crossed her face, but she recovered quickly, schooling her expression into one of practiced indifference. I'm not doing this with you, Daniel. Good, I said coolly. Because I'm done playing games. She left not long after, grabbing her bag and heading out the door without another word. I watched her go, a grim sense of satisfaction settling in. The cracks in her carefully constructed facade were growing, and I was more than ready to use them to my advantage. I wasn't just preparing for legal action anymore. I was taking back control of my life, my future, and everything she thought she had the power to destroy. With every step I took, my resolve only hardened. The truth was coming, and soon, Rebecca would have no choice but to face the consequences of her choices. The low hum of the office filled the background as I sat hunched over my keyboard, pouring my frustration into my work. The project deadline loomed, but for the first time in weeks, I actually felt clear-headed. Across from me, Olivia leaned over her desk, scanning a page of code with her sharp, focused eyes. She broke the silence with a small smile. "You're a machine," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "How do you come up with this stuff under pressure?" I glanced up, momentarily caught off guard by the genuine admiration in her voice. "I guess it's easier to focus on work than other things," I muttered, my voice trailing off. Her brow furrowed slightly as she studied me. "Rough time at home?" I hesitated, then gave a small nod. "You could say that. It's been challenging." Olivia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Well, if it's any consolation," she said, her voice steady, "you're doing incredible work. It's not just the coding, either. It's the way you lead the team, the way you keep your cool when the rest of us are 2 seconds away from throwing our laptops out the window. That kind of focus is rare." Her words landed deeper than she probably realized. For so long, I had been drowning in Rebecca's betrayal, questioning everything, my worth as a husband, as a father, as a man. But here was Olivia, seeing value in me without an agenda. I couldn't help but compare the two women. Rebecca, once the bright force in my life, had become a storm of deceit and selfishness. The love in her words had long since faded, replaced by dismissive glances and clipped responses. Olivia, on the other hand, was steady. Real. She wasn't trying to manipulate me, wasn't trying to cover her tracks or spin lies, she was just being honest. "Thanks, Olivia," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. I needed to hear that. She smiled back, her eyes warm. "Anytime. You're not just good at what you do, Daniel. You're one of the best. Don't forget that." She turned back to her work, but I sat there for a moment, letting the feeling settle in. It wasn't just gratitude I felt. It was something else. A realization. I deserved better. Better than Rebecca's dishonesty. Better than a marriage where I was the only one still trying. For the first time in weeks, something inside me reignited. Olivia's simple, genuine kindness had awakened a confidence I thought I had lost. I wasn't just getting through the days anymore. I was rebuilding. And this time, I was doing it on my terms. The Saturday air was crisp as I sat in my car, parked discreetly across the street from Magnolia Cafe. I adjusted my rearview mirror, my pulse steady, my breathing measured. Through the window, I spotted Rebecca at a corner table. She was laughing. Not the forced, hollow laugh she had been giving me for months, but real laughter. The kind she hadn't shared with me in a long time. And then I saw him. Tall, sharply dressed, leaning in just a little too close. His hand rested on hers across the table, their body language so natural, so familiar, it made my stomach twist. I had known. I had seen the signs. I had all the evidence. But seeing it with my own eyes? That was a different kind of pain. His grip tightened around the camera resting in his lap, fingers trembling slightly. This wasn't the future he had imagined, not for himself, not for his children. He lifted the camera, its lens zeroing in on the couple. Each press of the shutter felt like a fresh wound, a jagged reminder of the reality he was now forced to accept. But at the same time, with every snap, there was vindication. Rebecca's face was alight with expression, animated in a way she hadn't been with him in years. The man across from her leaned in, his fingers grazing her hand in a way that spoke of familiarity. Casual intimacy. A comfort that should have belonged to Daniel, but didn't. His breath hitched as he zoomed in, focusing on their interlocked fingers. Her head tilted toward the man, her body language open, warm, so different from the stiff, detached woman she had become around him. Then, as if to confirm everything he already knew, the man reached across the table and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She smiled, soft and affectionate, the kind of smile Daniel hadn't seen in years. He captured the moment, his jaw tightening with each shutter click. Minutes later, the two of them stood and made their way toward a nearby park. Keeping a safe distance, Daniel followed. His heart pounded in his chest, but his movements were steady, calculated. He crouched behind a cluster of bushes when they stopped, watching in cold silence as Rebecca leaned in and kissed the man, deeply, intimately. A sharp breath escaped him, a violent mix of fury and heartbreak crashing through his veins. This was it. The confirmation. The proof. He lifted the camera one final time and took the shot. Then, without another glance, he turned and walked back to his car. As he drove home, a grim determination settled in his chest. There was no coming back from this. No excuses she could spin. No lies she could weave to undo what he had just seen with his own eyes. Now, he had everything he needed. It was time to confront her. The next morning, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee with slow, measured movements. Rebecca walked in, her phone clutched in one hand. Her posture was guarded, her expression unreadable. He glanced up at her, a faint smile playing at his lips, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning," he greeted smoothly, his voice deceptively light. She hesitated, sensing something beneath the surface. "Morning," she replied, sliding into the chair across from him. He took another sip, then set his mug down deliberately. "You know," he began, his tone casual but edged with something sharp, "Olivia had some really great ideas for the project yesterday. We ended up staying late to go over them." Rebecca's entire body went rigid for a fraction of a second. A blink can you'd miss it kind of reaction. But Daniel caught it. Her voice was clipped when she responded. "Olivia?" "Yeah," he said, meeting her gaze with unsettling intensity. "She's brilliant. It's refreshing to work with someone so passionate about what they do." Rebecca forced a thin smile, her fingers tightening ever so slightly around her coffee mug. "Sounds like you two get along." "We do," he replied, leaning back in his chair. "She really appreciates my dedication. It's nice, you know. Feeling valued." Rebecca's jaw tensed. Her mask of indifference was slipping. "Well," she said, her voice carrying just the faintest edge, "it's good that someone at work notices." Daniel tilted his head, studying her carefully. Then, with quiet deliberation, he said, "It's funny, she sees things in me that I thought were invisible these days." He watched as something flickered in Rebecca's expression, something he hadn't seen in weeks. Concern. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but he stood abruptly, cutting off whatever excuse or protest she was about to give. "I'll be late tonight," he said, voice neutral as he grabbed his keys. "Big deadline coming up. Don't wait up." As he walked out the door, he felt it, that flicker of satisfaction. Rebecca wasn't the only one who could plant doubt. The tables were turning. And for the first time in a long time, he was the one in control. That evening, Daniel sat at the living room table, his laptop open and a folder of printed documents neatly arranged beside it. The room was silent. The kind of silence that carried weight. The kind that signaled something irreversible was about to happen. Rebecca stepped into the room, phone in hand, pausing the moment she saw his expression. Calm. Composed. But with a sharpness in his eyes she hadn't seen before. "Rebecca," he said, his voice steady, almost clinical. "We need to talk." Her brows furrowed as she set her phone down. "What's this about?" Without a word, Daniel turned the laptop toward her. On the screen, a slideshow of betrayal played before her eyes. Rebecca at the cafe with Mark, their hands touching across the table. The two of them strolling through the park, side by side, their body language intimate. And then, the final nail in the coffin, a kiss that left no room for excuses. Her face drained of color as she stared at the images, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Like Mark, she found herself looking off toward the distance, as if hoping for some escape from the reality laid bare in front of her. Her voice wavered as she finally spoke. What is this?" Daniel's tone was cold, unyielding. "It's the truth," he said. "Your truth." Rebecca's eyes darted between the screen and Daniel, her breathing shallow, her panic growing. "I can explain," she whispered. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. His expression was unreadable. "Go ahead," he said, his voice calm but edged with ice. "I'd love to hear it." She hesitated, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. "It's not what it looks like," she blurted, her desperation bleeding through every syllable. "This isn't about you, Daniel. It's about me. About my growth. My freedom." Daniel scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. "Your growth," he repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "And that required lying? Sneaking around? Betraying everything we built?" Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out toward him, as if somehow, this could still be undone. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. Daniel didn't move. He didn't soften. His eyes cut through her like a blade. "You didn't just hurt me, Rebecca," he said, his tone even, almost eerily calm. "You destroyed us. You destroyed our trust. Our family." Her shoulders slumped, the weight of her choices finally pressing down on her. For once, there were no excuses left to reach for. No justifications to grasp. She lowered her gaze and barely whispered, "I'm sorry." Daniel let out a breath, but there was no relief in it. No forgiveness. Just finality. "Sorry isn't enough," he said. "Not anymore." The silence that followed was suffocating. The reality of the damage, of the irreversible consequences, settled between them like an immovable wall. For Daniel, this was the moment the scales tipped, where regret could no longer outweigh the truth. They sat across from each other at the dining table, a thick folder resting between them like a loaded weapon. The chandelier's dim light cast sharp shadows on Daniel's face, highlighting the calm yet unshakable resolve in his expression. Rebecca, on the other hand, sat rigidly, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. The tension in the room was suffocating. "I think it's time we stop pretending," Daniel said, his voice steady, measured. He reached forward and slid the folder across the table toward her. "These are the divorce papers." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the folder as if it were a grenade, one she wasn't sure how to disarm. "Divorce?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Daniel, no. We can fix this. We can." "No," he interrupted, his tone firm, unwavering. "We can't. And I won't pretend that we can." His voice was devoid of malice, but there was no softness in it either. Only truth. "What you've done, what you've chosen, has consequences." Her eyes darted from the folder back to his face, her panic bubbling over. "But the kids, Daniel. We have a family. You can't just." "I can," he cut her off, his tone final. "And I will." He exhaled slowly, keeping his focus sharp. "For Lily and Noah's sake, I've laid out terms that keep their lives as stable as possible. They'll stay here with me. You'll have visitation, but this will remain their home." Rebecca's face crumpled. With trembling hands, she reached for the folder, flipping it open, her eyes scanning the documents. Her voice grew frantic. "This isn't fair. You're taking everything." Daniel leaned forward, his gaze locked onto hers. "Fair?" he echoed, his voice quiet but cutting. "Was it fair when you lied? When you put our kids' security at risk for your freedom?" Tears spilled over her cheeks as she looked up at him. "Daniel, please," she choked out. "We've been together for 12 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" His jaw tightened. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes, something almost like sadness. "It did," he said softly. "But the person I married isn't sitting in front of me anymore." Rebecca opened her mouth to protest, but the words died before they could form. Daniel pushed his chair back, the movement smooth, deliberate. "You can sign the papers," he said, standing to his full height. "Or we can take this to court." He met her gaze, unwavering. "Either way, I'm done." As he turned and walked away, the only sound left in the room was the quiet, broken sobs of the woman he once loved. Daniel didn't look back. His steps were steady, his resolve unwavering. For the first time in months, maybe even years, everything felt clear. This wasn't just the right decision, it was the only decision. Rebecca sat alone at the dining table, the divorce papers lying open before her. The crisp white pages blurred as fresh tears streamed down her face. She wiped at them with trembling hands, her breath coming in uneven gasps. The weight of what she had lost hit her in waves, each one crashing harder than the last. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, his face unreadable. He didn't speak. He didn't press her. The silence between them said more than any words ever could. Finally, Rebecca broke it. "Daniel," she croaked, her voice hoarse. "Please, can't we just talk about this? I know I made mistakes, but I never meant to hurt you." He didn't move, his expression unchanging. "Rebecca," he said, his voice firm but emotionless, "we've talked enough. This is where it ends." Her lip trembled as she dropped her gaze back to the papers, her fingers tracing the edges as if stalling for time. "But the kids, how will they understand? How do I?" Her voice cracked, and when she looked up again, her eyes were desperate, pleading. "I can change, Daniel. I can fix this." He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. His voice was calm, but there was no hesitation in it. "It's too late. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about Lily and Noah. They need stability. They need better than this." Rebecca's shoulders sagged, the last bit of strength giving way to the weight of her choices. Her hand hovered over the pen beside the folder, fingers shaking as she hesitated. "I never wanted it to end like this," she whispered, barely audible. Daniel's gaze softened, but only slightly. "And yet, here we are," he said quietly, his sadness barely masked beneath his resolve. Her hand trembled as she finally picked up the pen. Each stroke of her signature felt like another nail in the coffin of their marriage. When she set the pen down, her breath hitched, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing. Daniel didn't react. He simply picked up the folder, his eyes scanning the signature. Then, with a nod, he said, "Thank you." Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Rebecca alone in the silence of her defeat. The soft hum of the dishwasher was the only sound in the kitchen as Daniel sat at the dining table with Lily and Noah. A plate of untouched cookies sat between them, forgotten. Lily stared at her hands, twisting her small fingers together anxiously. Across from her, Noah slouched against his chair, fidgeting with a toy car, his usual energy replaced with quiet uncertainty. "Dad?" Lily finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's gonna happen to us? To our family?" Daniel's chest tightened at the vulnerability in her words. He reached across the table, gently taking her hands in his. "Lily," he said softly, "no matter what happens, one thing will never change. I love you and Noah more than anything, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you both feel safe and loved." Lily's eyes shimmered with tears as she looked up at him. "But Mom's leaving, isn't she?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Does that mean we're not a family anymore?" Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat, steadying himself. "We'll always be a family," he reassured her. "It might look a little different, but the love we have doesn't change. Your mom and I will both still be here for you, even if we're not together." Noah looked up from his toy car, his brow furrowed. "Are we gonna have to move?" Daniel shook his head. "No, buddy. You're staying right here. You'll still have your rooms, your school, your friends. This will always be your home." Lily's tears spilled over as she suddenly leaned forward, wrapping her arms tightly around Daniel's neck. "I don't want things to change," she sobbed. "I just want us to be like we were before." Daniel pulled her close, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. "I know, sweetheart," he whispered, holding her just a little tighter. "Change is hard," Daniel murmured, his voice steady yet gentle. "But we'll get through this together. I promise." Noah climbed onto his lap, wrapping his small arms around his father's neck. "We love you, Dad," he whispered. Daniel pressed a kiss to the top of Noah's head, holding both of his children close. "And I love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than you'll ever know." As they clung to him, he felt something shift within himself, a renewed sense of purpose, a clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead would be difficult, but he would face it with unwavering strength. For Lily. For Noah. For the future they deserved. The sun filtered through the large windows of the law office, casting a soft glow across the polished wooden desk. Daniel sat upright in a firm leather chair, his posture rigid but composed. Before him, a spread of documents lay neatly arranged, financial records, printed screenshots of messages, and photographs exposing Rebecca's infidelity. The lawyer, a poised woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, flipped through the files with methodical precision. When she finally looked up, her expression was assured. "Mr. McAllister," she began, her tone professional yet reassuring, "you're in a very strong position here. The evidence of your wife's infidelity, combined with your financial stability and the precautions you've taken to protect your assets, places you at a clear advantage." Daniel let out a slow exhale, feeling some of the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. "And Rebecca?" he asked, his voice calm but cautious. The lawyer nodded, anticipating the question. "She'll likely push for more involvement in the children's lives, but the documentation you've provided significantly weakens her case. Her actions demonstrate a disregard for the stability and well-being of the family. The court will prioritize what's best for Lily and Noah, and based on everything here, securing primary custody is highly likely." Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. "I just want to protect my kids," he said firmly. "That's my priority." The lawyer's expression softened just slightly. "And that's exactly what you're doing," she assured him. "This process won't be easy, but with the evidence you have and the careful approach you're taking, you're well prepared." As Daniel stepped out of the office, the reality of the situation settled over him. It was a heavy burden, but beneath it, there was also a sense of control. He wasn't just reacting anymore, he was taking charge. Not just for himself, but for his children. That evening, the house felt heavier than usual. Rebecca stood in the doorway of their bedroom, a half-packed suitcase resting on the bed. Clothes lay folded beside it, but the act of packing itself felt almost forced, hesitant, as if she were trying to slow the inevitable. Daniel stood in the hallway, arms crossed, his back leaning against the wall. He didn't offer to help. He didn't say much at all. The silence between them stretched, thick with everything left unsaid. The only sounds in the room were the soft hum of the house and the occasional rustle of fabric as she placed another item into the suitcase. At one point, she paused, her back still to him. Slowly, she turned, glancing at him over her shoulder. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion or tears, maybe both. "This isn't how I wanted things to end," she murmured. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm, measured. "It's not just about what you wanted, Rebecca," he said evenly. "It's about the choices you made." She dropped her gaze, saying nothing, before turning back to her suitcase. Each movement was slow, deliberate, like she was dragging out every second before she had to leave. When she finally zipped the suitcase closed, she hesitated again. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the family photos on the wall, the familiar details of the life they had built together. Now, they felt like relics of something already gone. "I'll be staying with Rachel for a while," she said, her voice quiet, as if speaking too loudly would make it all too real. Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable. "Take the time you need," he replied, his tone detached. She lingered for a moment, but there was nothing left to say. Then, finally, she picked up her suitcase and walked toward the door. The soft click of it shutting behind her echoed through the empty hallway. And just like that, she was gone. Daniel stood in the living room, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The house felt unnervingly quiet, as though Rebecca's departure had taken more than just her presence, it had taken the life they once shared. His gaze drifted across the room, settling on the family portraits perched on the mantel, the scattered remnants of Lily and Noah's playtime, the worn indentations on the couch where they had spent countless evenings together. The emptiness was undeniable. But it wasn't suffocating. Instead, it felt like a clearing, a space where something new could take root. Daniel inhaled deeply, the silence both comforting and sobering. His marriage was over. That chapter had closed. But that didn't mean everything had ended. It was a chance to rebuild. To create a home filled with warmth, stability, and love, not the kind that was bound by obligation, but the kind that endured through honesty and care. One step at a time, he would fill the empty spaces with something real. Something better. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting golden streaks across the counter as Daniel poured 2 bowls of cereal for Lily and Noah. The hum of the coffee maker and the sound of their laughter filled the space with something that had been missing for far too long, genuine ease. For the first time in months, the house felt alive. Not with tension. Not with forced conversations or hidden resentments. But with lightness. As the kids ate, their voices animated as they talked about their plans for the day, Daniel leaned against the counter, just watching. Their resilience amazed him. Despite everything, Lily's natural curiosity remained intact, and Noah's boundless energy never wavered. They weren't dwelling on the past. They were looking forward, excited about the little things, school, cartoons, what game they would play later. They were his anchor. His reason to keep moving forward. Later that afternoon, as Daniel wrapped up work, his phone buzzed. A familiar name lit up the screen. Olivia. Want to grab a coffee? Daniel hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, with a small exhale, he typed back a simple response. Sure. Let's meet. At the cafe, conversation flowed effortlessly. Olivia's warmth, her easy laughter, it all brought a sense of normalcy Daniel hadn't even realized he was missing. They joked about work, about the chaos of their latest project, and at one point, she shook her head, smiling. You seem lighter, she observed, her voice soft, thoughtful. Like you're starting to find your footing again. Daniel nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I think I am, he admitted. It's been a journey, but the kids keep me grounded. And, he paused, glancing at her. Having good friends helps. Olivia's eyes sparkled. Well, she said playfully, if you ever need another distraction, I'm always up for coffee. And terrible coding jokes. Daniel chuckled, the warmth of her words settling over him. For the first time, he let himself consider something he hadn't in a long time. A future that wasn't weighed down by the past. As he stepped out of the cafe, the sun shone brightly overhead, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel felt something new. Hope. Resilience is forged in the fire of hardship, and Daniel's journey is a testament to that truth. Despite the wreckage of Rebecca's betrayal, he found the strength to focus on what mattered most, his children. Their well-being became his guiding light, helping him channel his pain into something greater, purpose. The love he had for them became the foundation of his recovery. Through their laughter, their innocent questions, and their unwavering trust, he rediscovered what it meant to be a father, not just in title, but in action. Not a perfect family. But a real one. A family built on stability, love, and unshakable support. And in that love, Daniel found something Rebecca's betrayal had nearly stolen from him. His worth. His power. And above all else, his future. In the end, Daniel's story wasn't just one of survival, it was one of rebirth. He hadn't simply endured. He had rebuilt. From the ashes of betrayal, he forged a future that was stronger, more authentic, one rooted in self-respect, love, and unwavering resilience. Hope had once felt distant, almost impossible. But now, it was his foundation. A guiding light toward renewal and a life he could embrace without regret. Standing on the back porch, Daniel watched Lily and Noah race through the yard, their laughter dancing on the warm evening breeze. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the world in hues of amber and gold. A perfect backdrop for the peace that had finally settled within him. "Dad!" Lily called, breathless with excitement, her cheeks flushed from running. "Come play tag with us." Daniel chuckled, setting down his coffee mug. "All right," he said, stretching his arms, "but don't think for a second I'm gonna take it easy on you." Lily giggled, already darting away. Noah squealed in delight, ready to escape their dad's grasp. And just like that, Daniel was chasing them across the yard, their laughter filling the air, a melody more healing than any words could ever be. In that moment, as the weight of the past loosened its grip, Daniel realized something. His heart, once heavy with anger and grief, was now full of something else. Determination. Love. Freedom. Later, as the evening settled into quiet, the three of them sat side by side on the porch. Lily leaned against Daniel's arm, her small frame warm against his. "Dad," she murmured, her voice soft but sure. "We're going to be okay, right?" Daniel glanced down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. He smiled. "We're not just going to be okay, sweetheart," he said, his voice steady with certainty. "We're going to be great. I promise." Lily's lips curled into a sleepy smile, her faith in him shining through her tired eyes. On his other side, Noah snuggled closer, his head resting against Daniel's shoulder. And in that moment, Daniel felt something he hadn't in a long time: clarity. Strength. The road ahead would have its challenges. There would be moments of doubt, days that tested him. But there was something beautiful about starting over. A blank slate. A chance to fill their lives with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. As the first stars blinked into the night sky, Daniel pulled his children close. Together, they were stepping into something new. A future built not on pain, but on resilience. On love. And above all, on the promise of a brighter tomorrow.